To introduce our main program today, I'm pleased to welcome to the stage another Seattle 4 member, Suzanne Griffin. Seattle has been home base for her family since 1980. Suzanne held leadership positions at Washington state education agencies and institutions while earning her PhD in education from the UW. In 2002, she received a sabbatical from Seattle community colleges to research ways of improving literacy skills of Afghan women. When she arrived in Kabul, however, she was assigned a larger role in rebuilding the country's educational system. Suzanne spent over 11 years there leading projects in health, education, and higher learning. The next Diplomacy International Task Force event is scheduled for 11 a.m. on November 18th, where Suzanne will be speaking about Afghan and her experience working in development there. More details, including the Zoom link, will be included in this Friday's totem. Suzanne, the podium's yours.
Thank you. I'm very pleased today to introduce our speaker, Jason Gross. He's the Executive Director of the United States Global Leadership Coalition, which is a nationwide coalition of over 500 businesses and NGOs that work in Washington, D.C. and around the country to strengthen American civilian-led tools of development and diplomacy alongside defense. Jason has over 20 years of experience in public policy on Capitol Hill and presidential campaign experience, which he uses to oversee the day-to-day operations of the coalition. Prior to joining USGLC, of which Jason was one of the first members, he was on the chief of staff of the U.S. Representative Joe Courtney, who served 4 terms in the U.S. Congress and was one of the most productive members of that Congress. Earlier, Mr. Gross served as a senior professional staff member for the European Affairs Commission of the House International Relations Committee, and for ranking member Sam Jendison of Connecticut. He also was on the Foreign Service team of Clinton Gore for the 1996 campaign. Mr. Gross earned a master's degree in international relations from the London School of Economics and holds a BA in political science from Tufts University. He lives now in Washington, D.C. with his wife, Connie Pendleton, who is a media lawyer in D.C., and they have 2 sons. Welcome, Mr. Gross.
Thank you, Suzanne. Good afternoon from the other Washington. Rainy today, like Seattle today in Washington, D.C., but it's great. I want to appreciate the Seattle Rotary Club for inviting USGLC to speak, and especially salute our USGLC state advisory committee leaders who are also working with Seattle Rotary, including Congresswoman-elect Marilyn Strickland, who will be representing the 10th District of Washington in the 117th Congress in January. General Jimmy Collins, a longtime friend of USGLC, and I see on today's call, David Woodward, I believe, is on today. And he has helped make the visit today possible. And Jeff Parker as well has been serving on our state AC. So thank you to all, and especially thank you to everyone who served in uniform for our country on this very special day. Thank you for your service. I want to talk first a little bit about my organization. You heard a little bit about it just now, and then get into some quick thoughts about the election last week, and then really have some time for some questions and answers for the rest of the time, so we can have a good dialogue this afternoon and morning for all of us. First of all, as you heard, USGLC is proud to celebrate 25 years of building a better, safer world. We are over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations, alongside our network of business, faith, military, and community leaders from all across the country. What brings these diverse voices together is a firm belief that we live in an interconnected world and that America needs to be engaged globally to advance our interests here at home. And we talk about a tiny 1% of the overall federal budget called the International Affairs budget that is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments that this country makes. We have a significant conversation to talk about today about the election that began last week. A really tumultuous election season, I think we'd all agree. Captivating, nail-biting finish. Record-breaking turnout, over 150 million Americans voting. Record-breaking spending, over $14 billion spent. And I think unpacking some of these dynamics to see what this election's impact is going to mean for America's role in the world going forward. Last week, I think you could say this was a verdict on Donald Trump, on President Trump, that he was personally rejected, but I think one can argue that Trumpism itself was not rejected as a result of last week's election. President Trump became just the fourth elected incumbent to be defeated since 1900, with a margin of 5 million votes right now for Joe Biden and counting. He's at about Ronald Reagan's 50.8 vote share in 1980 when Reagan first came in and defeated the incumbent Jimmy Carter. So some parallels between last week's election and 1980. But unlike 1980, only one Senate seat flipped for the Democrats thus far, unlike 1980 when Reagan swept in a Senate majority with his large victory. And the GOP won House seats against all projections for both of these. And the eventual margin for the Democrats in the House will be much closer to 218 than what it was with their 232 seat standing before last week as final races get called. And what I say about that, that it was not a rejection of Trumpism, you saw successful Republican candidates running across the country for the Senate and the House, running very close to a Trump agenda and staying very uniform with him in the aftermath of the election last week, despite any evidence of any massive voter fraud. You're still seeing Republicans sticking close to President Trump, certainly in advance of the key Georgia Senate runoffs, two right now scheduled for January, and Republicans currently holding on to a 2-seat margin in the Senate. Those 2 seats will be extraordinarily important. And right now, they're sticking with Trump is about very much keeping the base energized and alive for those key Georgia Senate races in order to maintain their majority in the 117th Congress in the Senate. We also call this at USGLC, which wouldn't be surprising to any of you, the global pandemic election. I mean, you were all on the front lines of this early on during this crisis, and how the pandemic affected this election, from driving an historic number of early mail-in ballots to upending traditional voter engagement strategies to transforming candidate debates behind plexiglass and going virtually this time. Americans were divided on our COVID response, but we found early on, we conducted a national survey with Morning Consult, and we found that 79% of voters believed it was very important to work with other countries to fight diseases that could spread globally. But as the election drew closer, the party splits began to emerge again. 9 out of 10 voters believing their candidate for president would handle the coronavirus pandemic better going forward. Certainly COVID upended the economy, and that was one of the driving dynamics of the results of last week. In 2020, with more than 8 in 10 voters were concerned about the economic impact from the pandemic. Party splits again were stark on the issues in the exit polls. 82% that identified the economy as their top issue supported President Trump, and 82% of voters who picked the pandemic as the top issue supported Vice President Biden. We also saw a deepening rural-urban divide in this election from last week. Suburbs became even more competitive from 2016 to 2020, but wide divisions remained between rural and urban America in the results of last week. Just one example from one of the states where USGLC operates very closely, in Wisconsin, where Vice President Biden flipped only 2 of the 23 rural counties that Donald Trump had flipped in 2016. Biden won narrowly in Wisconsin by turning out Milwaukee and Madison, but that reversion back to those rural counties didn't happen for Biden, showing again that residual divide right now between rural voters and urban voters. trade of a very important issue to this group as well. Across all geographies, heading into the election, a survey showed 9 in 10 survey respondents saw international trade as good for relations with other countries, which was a stark change from some of the 2016 voting in the Midwest heading into that election. So we did see a different, although President Trump didn't move from his viewpoints on trade necessarily, we are seeing, I think, a different, more nuanced belief of trade, even in the Midwest, and certainly in the aftermath of the agricultural trade wars going on with China over the last few years. Foreign aid was not an election issue in 2020, something we were watching very closely at the USGLC. After the 2018 midterm saw President Trump's strong remarks on the caravan coming from Central America, focusing a spotlight on aid to Central America, really entered the dialogue of the 2018 midterms. There was no commensurate issue like that on foreign assistance that penetrated into the top issues in 2020. And despite the two-party conventions being upended by the pandemic, the parties released platforms which included positive policy positioning on foreign assistance. Now, the Republican platform really reverted to 2016 language that was good, but the point is the official documents from both the Democratic and Republican Party had good things to say, both about America's development programs as well as its diplomatic programs, showing a consensus on our narrow issue at USGLC. Overall, in terms of commercials, the air war during this campaign, of 606 out of 6,687 unique Republican and Democratic campaign ads this cycle, only 600, or about 9%, touched on foreign policy. The common foreign policy themes in these small sliver of ads included China's role in the pandemic, the reshoring of supply chains for PPE and vaccines, and the role of alliances. But again, not a major foreign policy election certainly in terms of the ads that were being run by congressional and presidential candidates. In terms of Congress, we worked very closely. We saw strong bipartisan congressional support on diplomacy and development still continue after the election. In today's day and theme in the House, more than 70 veterans have won their races alongside at least 13 incoming freshmen into the Congress who served our country in uniform. And we have found that these have been among the most outspoken and persuasive in terms of reaffirming America's proactive leadership in the world and engagement in the world. And we expect the same coming up in this next Congress. We have from U.S. Global Leadership Coalition state advisory committees from across the country. We're proud to say 5 state advisory committee members were elected to Congress, including Congresswoman-elect Strickland, but also Deborah Ross in North Carolina, a Democrat from North Carolina, Carlos Jimenez, a Republican from Florida, Stephanie Bice, a Republican from Oklahoma, and Jacob LaTurner, a Republican from Kansas. Again, showing the bipartisan nature of our support that Republicans entering Congress, Democrats entering Congress have served on our state advisory committees, and we're excited about them continuing their leadership they've shown in our states, now leading Congress right now for this new class heading in. If we look at what a Biden administration will look like for the president-elect and what it will mean for America's role in the world. We already today, discussed a lot, a number of our friends here on the call who have had interactions with the senator over the years and the vice president. And you have someone entering the White House right now who has a very long track record of support. He's a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for 34 years. Chair of 4 years, vice president, of course, for 8 years. His platform for this campaign was about elevating diplomacy as the premier tool of our global engagement, renewing alliances, reinvigorating global diplomacy, and leading the world in addressing urgent global challenges. The vice president was the honoree at our tribute celebration in 2013 because of his leadership on these issues. And what he's talked about during the campaign is kind of what sums it up was an op-ed he published in Foreign Affairs magazine, where he talked about America going back to the head of the foreign policy table, in a position to work with its allies and partners to mobilize collective action on global threats. He has vowed to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement at the world, rejoined the World Health Organization on day one of his administration, and has pledged to host a summit of democracies in his first year of office, kind of laying out on the front foot right now about where he's going to be on America's role in the world. Biden has pledged to invest in the State Department, has called on USAID to play a leading role in the global response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Vice President Biden has called on a renewed focus on Latin America, really drawing on his experience as in his leadership in the Obama administration of the Alliance for Progress that sought to work closely with our Central American neighbors. In 2018, Biden led a major bipartisan effort with Senator Richard Lugar, Republican from Indiana, on the Senate Foreign Relations, that successfully restored critical funds for development, assistance, and diplomacy, restoring $4 billion in funding, evidence of his longstanding belief in funding our diplomatic and our development programs. Let me close this section and turn to your questions and on an issue we kind of began with, and that is what we're talking about in our coalition of what the cost of inaction globally has been for failing to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And one area where we're looking at very closely is really on the economic impacts abroad that have an impact on us here at home in the United States. If you look at U.S. exports to top trading partners right now are down as much as 50% in the developing world, the fastest growing markets, of course, in the world since the global shutdown from COVID-19 earlier this year. 38% down in U.S. exports to Mexico in this period, 30% down to South Africa and Brazil, down 48% to India. These are real world consequences right now for we're going to launch an economic recovery. We're going to need to have these markets for our exports and our jobs to recover. And they're suffering along as we are right now economically and health-wise from COVID-19. One of the reasons we say it's so important for us to address this at home and abroad is to pave the way for a U.S. export-led economy. We're going to need to, and certainly Seattle and Washington State are so aware of the importance of that to our economy. Two other challenges emerging right now in recent days, and one is that on vaccine nationalism too, that we're going to need to watch out for. Amazing news coming out with the progress from Pfizer. As we all saw, 90% success rate. Markets rallied in response to that, seeing how critical that's going to be for our own recovery. But there are real reasons and challenges to vaccine nationalism and risks if we don't, in addition to taking care of everyone here at home, work to make sure we're distributing this vaccine abroad as well. A recent study came out that for every $1 spent on vaccinating low-income countries, high-income countries, including the U.S., would get back about $5 in economic impact. So stabilizing those countries abroad through COVID, so essential for our recovery on the economy, which both Republicans and Democrats acknowledge has been an impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The final thing to leave you with is we have the science, but do we have the political will to stop the next pandemic? Talking about global health infrastructure around the world right now to learn lessons from this one. And I think that was where we can turn to you right now for questions to see what we think about what the answers, the results from the election mean for addressing this pandemic in the short term and the will to address future pandemics from causing this much disruption in the future. Appreciate your time today. So glad to be part of this discussion with you and look forward to your questions now.
Jason, thank you. I've got a couple of questions in the wings, and I think I may even have one myself for once. So let's start off with Dominic's, which is just these people on this in the group here know how much I can't read. So this is awesome. Other than international isolationism, how does Trumpism differ from traditional domestic Republican agenda?
So this would be how Trump has diverged from, especially on foreign policy we're talking about today, what the divergence has been between Trump's leadership and what the traditional Republican Party has been. I think two areas stand out a lot of what the split has been between traditional Republican foreign policy and President Trump's influence, and that's been on trade and immigration. Certainly on trade, you've seen much more ramping up assertion of bilateral deals, of pressuring to change existing trade agreements, and certainly going to brinksmanship with China that has caused great disruption for our agricultural experts. That is not something that that would be in the tradition of the Bush presidencies or Ronald Reagan necessarily, and then the requirement afterwards for subsidy and payment back to help those farmers that have been disrupted, the soybean exporters, in other words, from those markets they counted on in China as well. So trade has definitely been an important stark departure, I think, from previous Republican leadership with where this president's been. And on immigration, has from day one been very much part of his, of a major issue that he has pointed to reverse other Republican trends of liberalizing, of looking to maximize legal immigration in the past. Certainly, George W. Bush during his presidency was looking to strike a grand bargain on immigration with Democrats that ended up falling short, as it did during the subsequent Obama administration as well. But there was much more of a receptivity, I think, to seeing as legal immigration as helping drive the economic engine. That has been a stark departure from where President Trump has portrayed immigration. And on both of those issues, I think that is the question to see of the residual influence of President Trump on the Republican Party after he leaves the White House, and what the standard bearers for 2024, assuming he's not running again, will be on Republican foreign policy and those pillars of their foreign policy in the past.
Okay, good answer. How long do you think it will take to rebuild the State Department and U.S. Foreign Services?
It's a great question, and one that has been important for a number of candidates running, and certainly of the vice president as well. When you lose, when you don't hire new people and you atrophy at staffing, it takes a while to bring those folks back, to retrain, to get them back into the State Department, and to come up with the resources to be able to do it. So this won't be an overnight situation where a new president comes in, snaps his or her fingers, and says that, okay, we're going to have a transformed and rebuilt State Department. It takes a long time to do that, and it will require, first of all, investing those resources to be able to recruit and bring back those who have left. A new generation right now, and an importance of diversifying the State Department as well. I think that's come from a number of supporters, both Democrats and Republicans, that the State Department should look much more like America when it's abroad as well, and not just traditionally of what it has. Women and diversity in higher ranks at our ambassadorships, but also in the mid-career levels as well. State Department, there's a new commitment for that. None of that happens overnight. So I think you're looking really at a 4-year process right now to halt and then reverse the trends that have been going on in recent years, where this has happened. The good news on this front is that one of the strengths we've seen at USGLC has been bipartisan support for overall, for resources, at least, for the State Department and USAID. Now, they haven't always translated into the hiring that we've been looking for necessarily, because that in the end is much more in the hands of the executive. But on the principle of funding people and programs for State Department and USAID, that has remained, even throughout these 4 years, a very firm bipartisan priority for Congress, for House and Senate, bicameral and bipartisan, with leaders on the Republican side like Jim Risch of Idaho, who stepped up as Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman, Marco Rubio, Mitt Romney, a number of leaders, Jerry Moran of Kansas, Lindsey Graham, certainly of South Carolina, has been outspoken in his support for civilian resources. So in addition to a new president coming in, that residual support from members of Congress, House and Senate, has the capacity to get those resources going so we can bend the curve as quickly as possible, but it will take a number of years to get back to where we need to, given the freeze and the atrophy in terms of hiring that's going on in the last few years in Foggy Bottom.
Okay. To what extent do you think U.S. agricultural exports will have lost market share as the economy recovers?
Yeah, not my expertise, but from people who are smarter than me on this that I know, just the same way that you can't rebuild a State Department overnight, you don't recapture markets, assuming we can get on more solid footing with some of our exporting markets overnight too. Sometimes those markets go other places as well. So I think that is going to take a concerted effort also. I think in the end, the quality of U.S. agricultural exports will win the day, but the disruption doesn't lead to a switch being turned on overnight. Supply chain shift. China goes to Brazil, goes to South America for other markets as well for its agricultural needs. And that takes some time to get back. So my inclination tells me that's going to be a couple of years as well before we're swinging back that way. And that is why significant subsidies have been necessary right now to bridge these gap for farmers who have been hurting for exports, especially over the last 18 months. And I think the imperative is to go repair some of those supply chains and lines and export markets that have been. And this is an area actually where, again, the programs that USGLC and our supporters around the country support can play a role in when it comes to the U.S. Export-Import Bank, U.S. Trade and Development Agency, the Foreign Commercial Service, our diplomats in the State Department right now who need to be unleashed and going out there and even in this COVID environment, really standing up for advocating for U.S. business interests abroad, trying to repair some of the political tension that's grown out between our allies and some of our adversaries on trade as well. And this is a role that they uniquely can play in terms of paving the way for it, plus all the other great things that our programs, our development and diplomacy programs do in terms of fighting corruption, fighting for the rule of law, transparency, all these things that that we need to keep on to make sure that there's a level playing field out there for American exports. Because when we can have a level playing field out there for our exports, we know we're going to do the best in the developed economies, and that's just a path we need to follow as soon as possible.
All right. Although I was caught up that you said people smarter than you. I'd like. What do those people look like? This is crazy.
Oh,
what are your top 3 recommendations for day 1 of President-elect Biden's administration on the foreign front?
On the foreign front, well, he's talked about 2 that seem to make a lot of sense overall. I think where the majority of the American people are, and that is rejoining the World Health Organization. I would add with the caveat, though, still demanding reform and accountability, because WHO and any UN, any multilateral organization is only as good as the members make it. So we have to demand change. We have to demand transparency from China and other countries as well, where COVID-19 emerged, and to make sure that we have accurate and fair information. But we got to be in the game too. And I think rejoining WHO makes an opportunity for us to be able to influence that, make it a more accountable organization, and provide better information. Again, so the next pandemic happens, we're more equipped, we're more ahead of the game, and can take more steps going. I think there is great support for rejoining the Paris Treaty also on climate change, and again, being an active participant in that to help shape where the battle against climate change is going to happen. And I think that is another one he's going to do on day 1 that will happen. And I think it is, from USGLC's perspective, really convening and talking about the role that the family of nations is going to take abroad to bring this pandemic, this current pandemic, to its heels right now. And that is, at that stage, is going to be very much about vaccine distribution, but it's also going to be talking about economic recovery and cooperation, and the sharing and manufacturing of PPE to help frontline workers around the world, and really energizing our own U.S. NGOs, those based in Washington State and around the country, who can make a great difference. But folks like World Vision, who are out on the front lines right now of trying to combat this this pandemic. Certainly, the Gates Foundation doing extraordinary work on its own in vaccine development and pushing on its own to add to that. So I would just think, given the trajectory right now, what's happening here and around the world, I don't see January 20th as being a situation where we can be rest on our laurels that the pandemic is under control. And I think that third priority of really summoning the collective will right now and challenging our adversaries who have been great, and certainly rallying our allies to do everything we can to bring this pandemic under control, would be the third and maybe the most important thing that incoming President Biden could do on day one.
All right, you ready for a lightning round?
Ready.
I got 3 questions and I got 3 minutes left.
Copy.
It appears our relationship with other countries has suffered over the past 4 years. What will it take to get trust back in the US?
I think it's a long process, and it's also a mixed bag. There are some with whom the Trump administration has had strong, good relations, and other ones in our allies where it has been strained. You've certainly seen. This isn't lightning yet. Okay, lightning. We had the number of foreign leaders who have already contacted the president-elect, I think augurs well for that shift over time. They've dealt with him in the past in his capacity as vice president and Senate Foreign Relations Committee chair, but it will take time also to reverse the trend to rebuild trust and alliances. So it starts quickly, but it will take some time.
I'm seeing a trend here with the answers. Did
Yes.
Trump's trade agreement help or hurt our farmers?
Maybe some of both. I think on balance it hurt over the long term, but there can be some times where you are, playing, striking a hard bargain. You can win some concessions. I'm not sure he did that though. I think the approach could have been hard line to be able to win structural concessions that might have helped farmers. I don't think he took advantage of that. I think the posturing really led to not enough concessions and therefore failed, even though one can argue that a more aggressive standpoint on behalf of U.S. farmers could have worked.
I love it. I'm liking this. This is a good game. Last question. Are Trump firings undermining the military as part of a strategy to keep the military from forcibly removing him from office?
Yeah. Quite a subject going on right now, I think there. We don't know necessarily, but that's not something that USGLC is commenting on right now. Certainly there makes a lot of sense for the final days of a transition in office to keep senior national security members in place right now where they have been, to prepare for things that we don't know are going to happen during the transition right now, security wise. The world doesn't stop. Our adversaries don't stop because we have a new president coming in right now. It's actually a vacuum in a time where some might want to challenge us in different ways, quietly or loudly. And changing horses during this time because of disagreements in the past, I think personal ones, especially as referred to earlier in our broadcast, with the Defense Secretary Esper and President Trump over the use of the military in terms of civilian protests, seem to be really poor timing right now. I don't know if it's as serious as what you're saying right now. It may just be more about some of the personal issues that President Trump had with these senior leaders right now that he's changing, but it is not the ideal time to be changing folks as an administration is winding down right now.
Jason, you are remarkable. That is a lot of knowledge up there, and I am personally very pleased to hear it all, and I really appreciate you being here today. I think we all very much appreciate you being here today, so thank you.
Well, it's our honor to be here today, and thank you for all of your great work of Rotary International and Rotarians across the world who are doing remarkable things to fight polio and to show the importance of international commerce. And USGLC loves working with this group, and thank you for everything you all are doing to make the world a better place.
Very good. Thank you.